Hey there, pilgrims. On this week's dose, we have Ron Levin, author of Higher Purpose Venture Capital and managing partner at Alumni Ventures.
Ron had an unconventional path into the world of venture capital, having worked in the travel and aviation industries, which eventually led him to start a business in that area as well that ended up reaching unicorn status and today employs over 1,000 people.
Later on, he got connected with Alumni Ventures and specifically Yard Ventures, a fund for the Harvard community, and he has been with the Alumni Ventures team for nearly 5 years since then.
So, in the interview, you'll hear a little bit more about Ron's winding journey, as well as his passion specifically around impact investing.
And with that, he tells us more about his blog, which actually ultimately led to his book, and how he believes that both profit and impact can be achieved in venture capital.
Listen through to hear Ron's take on the current state of the VC landscape, as well as his valuable advice to our listeners looking to get into both investing and entrepreneurship.
It was an absolute pleasure hosting Ron on this week's dose, and we're thrilled to share this engaging conversation with you all. Without further ado, here's our discussion with Ron.
You see here, kid, you gotta just go for it. Don't think about what comes after or what came before. You just gotta bend your knees, take a deep breath, and jump.
This is Venture Pill, your weekly dose of startups and venture capital. We break down recent startups in the news and interview founders and investors to help you stay informed in the evolving world of venture. On this week's dose, we have Ron Levin, author of Higher Purpose Venture Capital and managing partner at Alumni Venture, an esteemed colleague of mine. How's it going, Ron?
Great, thanks. Hi, Brandon. Hi, Sam. Great to see you.
Likewise, appreciate you joining the podcast. Getting things going here, would love to start with you walking us through your early career after graduating from Babson. What were your professional goals at the time?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Boston area, but I was very entrepreneurial from the time I was a kid. I started my first business at age 11 and actually ran a business, the same business for almost 10 years, really all the way through college.
Oh, wow.
So really entrepreneurial as a kid, and just being in the Boston area, a lot of people put in my ear, oh, Babson College, that's the place that has this entrepreneurship program. And, that was kind of in the really kind of mid later 90s when not every school had an entrepreneurship program. So that was kind of like the place to go if you're kind of a young, enterprising upstart. So I went there with the ambition of basically being an entrepreneur somehow. After a few years in college, though, as I was kind of exploring my interests and, getting through school, I realized, geez, I've got like a mountain of like 6-figure debt here. And then it was like, maybe I should get a real job for a while. But it was an interesting time to be graduating. It was kind of toward the end of the first dot-com bubble wave when all of these companies all of a sudden exploded and, your eBay stock was going up like 10% every single day and all kinds of craziness was happening in the market. So it was a bit hard to ignore that. I was sort of interested in finance, but I was also interested in somehow getting in on this tech and internet stuff that was happening, the interwebs, and we didn't even know what we were calling it back then. AOL, CompuServe were kind of evolving into the World Wide Web as the place people would go for their information and everything. So it was really early days then. So when I graduated, I had done some internships both for like early .com kind of sites as well as in finance and like more on the asset management side, kind of had these competing interests. I ended up getting a sort of a perfect job that kind of hit the sweet spot, working at Lycos, which was an early .com kind of portal search engine, kind of pre-Google. We were at one point the biggest internet company. Generally, Yahoo was the biggest at the time, but we were kind of right up there. And we were building this kind of multi-brand network. And so I was on the in-house M&A team. I got really fortunate. I got to get hired as kind of the junior person on this internal M&A team. So I got to start meeting like a lot of internet like entrepreneurs pretty early in my career. And I just thought the environment was amazing, just so much energy and excitement. Now that company ended up, not doing so well. They went through some mergers that didn't really work out too well, and then kind of imploded with the dot-com bubble, and more specifically, Google coming along with, frankly, a much better product that beat every other search engine that was out there. And we kind of lost our way. So the company actually didn't end up surviving too much beyond that period of time in any meaningful form anyway. But I personally got a chance to work over in Madrid because we had been merged with a Spanish internet company, and so got some international experience early. But then eventually it was like clearly time to leave, and I was essentially looking at where would I go next, still pretty early in my career, but kind of ready for the second thing. And I really was kind of interested in VC and was looking at some opportunities there, but it was still a tough market in VC back then. The whole .com thing had not really recovered yet. So I thought about my other interest, which was travel and even aviation. I kind of had an interest in airlines and the aviation industry. So I started looking at that in parallel. And then I went and worked in the airline industry. I was a route planner, basically deciding the network decisions. Where are we going to fly the planes? What type of planes do we use? How many frequencies? What cities do we serve? And I was at America West Airlines, which was an interesting place to go. It was kind of doing a post 9/11 turnaround. And in a way, those two things seem like very different jobs. But the two things together started to make sense a little bit later in my career when travel technology began to become a thing. And I was eventually, later on, fast forward a little bit, I came back for business school, did my MBA, and then kind of went off to live in Europe. I did consulting at McKinsey, but I was specifically in the airline industry, working with basically just airline and travel clients for a few years. But then eventually I was like, I love this travel and airlines, but I also really miss the environment of being in tech because of kind of the innovation and kind of the youthfulness and just always like thinking about the future. And so I thought about travel technology, and that kind of got me in the door over at booking.com, based over in Amsterdam, where I was living at the time. This was probably 2013 or so when I went to work at Booking. And I think a lot of people kind of know about Booking at this point, but it was essentially a company that had been acquired by Priceline, which was obviously a much better known brand in the US. And Priceline was on a tear. So for about a 10-year period, they were the number one performing company in all of NASDAQ. So it had just an unbelievable run. And the reason for that was not William Shatner and his, Priceline TV ads. It was booking.com that was just this unbelievable growth engine. And hotels actually pay high commissions. So every booking we got was basically like a 15 to 20% commission. And like when you book hotel rooms, that's hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars a pop. So if you could do that at scale, that's a heck of a cash cow business. And the company was just amazing at optimizing our search engine marketing and just, building a leading product, and was really a fantastic place to kind of learn the business. And so, I had envisioned doing something entrepreneurial. I got a chance at Booking where I sort of helped start a new division there, kind of a B2B division where we were selling services to hotel owners and managers. But that kind of gave me a platform to think about, if I'm going to actually become a real founder entrepreneur again, sort of getting at a point in my life and career where it's kind of like, let's get going. Thankfully, I kind of got a kick in the butt from one of my colleagues at Booking who left and started working on an idea basically for a better business travel management platform. And after a while, he eventually convinced me to join him. I finally said, to hell with it, let's do this thing. We made the decision standing on the top of a glacier in Argentina, of all places. It was kind of one of these places where you kind of have to step away from your reality to think deeply and big about what your future might bring. And, we basically decided then and there that we would start a company together. And I eventually reached out to someone else that I knew who had started and sold his company to Booking. And he agreed to be our third co-founder. So we kind of had myself as CEO, my friend Javier as chief product, and then this third guy, Avi, who was CTO at the time. And we said, let's do this. We're each going to invest some of our own money, and we're going to start creating a company. And that sort of brought back the entrepreneurial juices. And I'm happy to talk more about the startup journey that I was on. But obviously, the startup journey eventually led to getting into venture, having had the opportunity to raise the first funds and pitch investors from the other side of the table. I can kind of fast forward on TravelPerk, and we can talk more about that if you want, but we don't have to. But the upshot is TravelPerk today is a unicorn, 1,250 employees, customers around the world. My co-founder, who was the CTO, has been the CEO for quite a few years now. I had left I had some family health issues I had to attend to that brought me back to Boston, where I grew up, and I kind of left the business pretty early. But the company has done amazingly well, and it's been incredible to witness that. Even though I only really played a hand in the first year or so, it gave me a lot of energy and really brought me back to the world of entrepreneurship, which is what I love. And I just wanted to do something that allowed me to meet great entrepreneurs every day, learn about new technology and innovation, and just VC was kind of a natural fit for that. So, happy to talk more about how I got connected with Alumni, but I've been rambling on for a while, so I'll let you jump in with whatever you want to talk further on.
Yeah. Oh, what a winding journey with, being part of conventional industry and exploring your passion in aviation and travel, and that leading, of course, to a jump into the entrepreneurial space. Very, very unconventional, I would say, but it all kind of, like you said, pieces itself together when you look back on it. Now,
yeah, it's amazing somehow things happen in life that seem really odd at the time, or unfortunate things. Sometimes bad things happen in your career and so forth, but somehow in the end things start to make sense. You just kind of need a little more 20/20 hindsight to realize it. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we'd love to hear how you got connected with Alumni Ventures. What stood out to you about them, and how it's been since then, really.
Yeah. So when I moved back to Boston in 2016, it was kind of an interesting time. As I said, I was dealing with some health issues. With my mom was sick and eventually passed away, and I was not really doing a full-time job. I'd kind of left the startup. I'd come off of a divorce, kind of just coming back home. It was a little bit like awkward, like the whole world ahead of me. I can do whatever I want. On the other hand, it's a little bit like starting over and not really sure what I wanted to do. So I did a little bit of traveling in that time and kind of exploring different career options. I talked to some career coaches, like, what should I do? I took some career assessments, like, what would I be good at? And I remember one in particular that I took had a really interesting result. Like, it said, you score like 100% aptitude, whatever, for two possible careers. One of them was venture capital, and the other one was like headhunting, which was actually something I was thinking of doing, becoming like an executive search consultant or something. And I actually was starting to look into that as an option. But one fortunate thing happened, fortunate and maybe unfortunate in some ways later, which is the success of Travel Perk. We were able to secure a Series A term sheet very shortly after I left. And I had a secondary opportunity and was able, to take some liquidity, which, at the time, not knowing where the company was going, seemed like that would be nice. It gave myself a little padding personally. And so I took a bit off the table. Now, with hindsight, probably should not have done that, or at least not have sold as much as I did. But at the time, it gave me an opportunity to start doing some investing and thinking about, okay, what I really want to do. I don't have to rush into anything. So I started doing some angel investing to kind of learn about, other startups and how this whole investing side of things worked. Made a few bets, mixed results, as typically happens with angel investing. But in that journey, I discovered Alumni, and specifically Yard Ventures, the Alumni Ventures fund for the Harvard community. Pretty early days. They were kind of in Fund 1 at the time. I saw some marketing. There was an event at like the Harvard Club downtown. I went to the event, met a few folks from AV, and found also that I had a friend from business school who was already an investor with them. I'm like, okay, well, let me try to invest in Yard. What they do differently is they have a diversified portfolio. It's kind of investing across multiple stages, which I couldn't do as an angel investor. And I only had my own limited network, mostly in travel tech and, some people I knew. But I didn't know people in, really fintech or health tech or any number of other areas. So I thought, well, this is an interesting way of diversifying my portfolio. Let me take a shot, see what happens. So I kind of invested the minimum at the time into the Yard fund. In the first year or so, there were actually 2 quite positive exits in the portfolio. I'm like, this is interesting. There's something going on here. I haven't seen any exits from my angel investments, certainly not this quickly. And I started focusing a little bit more on that, and I got to know the team a little bit more. They had some other events that gave me an opportunity to meet a few folks. I got to join the investment committee of Yard, so working with Michael Madden, who's been leading the fund until recently, and just essentially had the opportunity to familiarize myself more with VC. And it became just an organic relationship build. And at one point, they were looking to add someone else to the R team. I wasn't sure if is this role a bit junior for me, or I don't know, but like, hey, this is an opportunity. When opportunities present themselves, like, it's not easy to get into VC in an investing role, certainly not where I was in my career. I had not taken like a kind of a direct path that you might say into VC. I'd kind of done a little of this and a little of that in my career. But because I'd formed the relationship and Yard and AV were interested in my background, having been a founder of a company that was, seemed to be doing well, they took a shot on me, and I took a shot on VC, and, with lots of fortune and, and everything that comes with it, it's worked out great. And, I'm now going on my 5th year. It'll be 5 years in June since I joined the team, and have been able to progress in my career, kind of joined as a principal, and have kind of now thankfully worked my way up to a managing partner title, and now have the responsibility of leading our seed fund, as well as our new focus fund that we call the Doctors Innovate Fund, a health tech fund, which has allowed me to explore something that was never in my past prior to VC in healthcare investing. So, every day is a learning journey. I've been with AV now longer than I'd been at any prior employment, which I think speaks to the fact that I continue to be curious, for one, and learning something new every day, and just working with people that I enjoy working with, that I feel listen, respect my opinion, folks that I can learn from and that I enjoy working with. And I feel like it's been a terrific fit, and, has allowed me to evolve and develop in my career to a place where I feel like this is really kind of what I've meant to be doing. It's very different from being an entrepreneur and a founder, and there are obviously a lot of trade-offs between one or the other. But for where I am right now in my career, it's hard to see myself doing anything else, really.
Yeah, that's an awesome story and journey with Alumni Ventures. That's network-powered venture capital at its finest. Digging in a little bit more, would love to hear about what excites you the most regarding venture investing. Are there any specific sectors that you find yourself gravitating towards? I imagine your experience in travel maybe has an influence, but would love to hear your take.
Yeah, it's interesting with the travel, because I think because I come from that industry, I actually approach travel deals with a bit more skepticism because of what I know. I have done a couple of travel deals in my time, but actually not very many. That may be part of the reason, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I've been able to explore a lot of other areas of interest. I think what I discovered as a VC, probably a year, maybe year and a half into it, is that I really get the most satisfaction out of investing in companies that are solving a big societal problem. I mean, most companies we fund are solving a problem or filling a need of some kind, but there are certain problems that are really solving issues for folks who are less fortunate, who maybe have not had a lot of opportunities in life, kind of bottom of the pyramid, low income. Those I gravitate toward a bit more, because they are very big problems that deserve to be solved. And there are really incredible entrepreneurs out there who are trying to solve them. And most of them are doing so because they've had a lived experience that have led them to that. And, it's interesting that there's actually a very broad, diverse array of, if you look at the companies that are trying to use technology to solve problems that relate to both the causes and the symptoms of social and wealth inequality. So there are education technology companies, there's fintech companies, there's health and wellness, there's food and water security, there's housing, affordability, there's disability technology, a lot of different areas. And I had the opportunity to invest in a number of these. And I finally had a realization that this was a common theme in what I really got excited about investing in. Now, it's not to say that I will only invest in companies like that, because my mandate is very broad, particularly with our seed fund, that I don't really limit myself. But I really get a lot of fulfillment when I'm able to invest in companies like that, which is why I started to channel that by writing a blog initially. So a couple of years ago, I decided to start what I called the Higher Purpose Venture Capital blog. I've now recently renamed it to the Higher Purpose SmörgåsBlog, because I sometimes cover topics that are not directly VC related, but somehow thematic in higher purpose. And I started telling the stories. My first sort of blogs were basically Q&A interviews with founders that I had invested in, and I wanted to kind of share their story with a bigger audience, because I thought it was worth telling. And then I expanded that to start using it as a platform to reach out to other entrepreneurs who I had not yet met. But I had the common theme of all of these founders had raised venture capital, because I really want to tell the story that capitalism can be a source of good in the world to help support deserving founders that are trying to solve big problems. And I also, there's that kind of social mission, but I want to really, encourage investors, angel investors, VCs to think about, how you put your investment dollars to work. Because, there is obviously a lot of correlation between successful tech companies and those that raise VC and are able to grow, but it's causation too. There's so many great startups, but if you can't raise venture, you may not have a shot at building a big successful company. And by the mere fact that any investor is willing to step in, and particularly when it's a VC and kind of institutional investor stepping in with hopefully a bigger check, there's an opportunity to actually create that big company. So I hope to not just inspire other entrepreneurs to know that they can raise VC and build a scalable business, but also to inspire investors just to think about, you've got a lot of power. Like we're really privileged to be in this business, that we're not just investing our own money, but investing other people's money. Let's do something important with it. Let's solve big problems. And so I really like to use my platform to try and solve, really meaningful, problems that I think technology can have a role to hopefully fix for some part of the population that may not have, as much privilege as some of us do.
Yeah, no, that's extremely well said. Thank you for sharing. And that definitely resonates with Sam and I. A lot of the companies we look to highlight are mission-based, high-impact companies making money and doing good at the same time. And then so you mentioned it, and it's a good natural segue into, we'd like to hear a little bit more about your book, Higher Purpose Venture Capital. What was the writing experience like? And also if you could just provide a brief overview of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Higher Purpose Venture Capital is really meant to share the stories of venture-backed companies that are solving problems related to social and wealth inequality. And I do that by essentially sharing the stories. They've primarily, stories that I featured in my blog, but I also provide some narrative around that to kind of, categorize. There are different categories of companies, from democratizing access to capital and credit to, solving problems for immigrants and migrant workers to, as I've mentioned, food and housing and disability tech. There's something on increasing charitable giving as well, all venture-backed startups that I talk about. So that's kind of the theme of the book. It's really meant to have sort of three audience: one, entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs; two, kind of people who are just generally interested in social justice and perhaps the intersection of capitalism and social justice, because capitalism can also be, a four-letter word in some circles, and capitalism has created a lot of the problems that we had in society. But I also firmly believe that it can be a solution to a lot of problems as well. And then, of course, also reaching out to founders and hopefully inspiring founders. And in each segment of the book, I talk about this, what venture capital firms have actually been investing in these companies as well, and I highlight them by name just to be a little bit practical about, like, if you have a similar venture, who might you want to talk to. But to your question of how the process was of writing a book, when I started blogging, I had no intention, or the thought never even crossed my mind to actually put it into a book format. But once I was sort of a year or so into it, it sort of dawned on me that I had enough content here that I could sort of tie it all up and kind of put a narrative around it, which I hadn't really thoroughly done before. So the process is interesting when you go about it that way, because I was writing it in pieces, right? When I first started, I was gung-ho. I was doing 2 blogs a week. Then I got down to 1 blog a week. Now I'm at a blog every 2 weeks, just because time gets in the way, and a lot on my plate these days. I also have a family and everything. So, but because I had already written enough blogs and had written them sort of across different categories, I felt like there was sort of a cohesive narrative that I wanted to tell around that. So it's a lot easier when you're doing it piecemeal, and you don't, as a first book, I'm not like, Stephen King, or Isaac Asimov, who can just sit down and write and it all comes flowing out. And I had to do it in pieces. And for me, like, I could really only write like early mornings. I would wake up, shower, go downstairs, and start writing. And that's when I'm at my freshest. Like late at night, I can't write for anything. It just words just don't come out. So I had to find like my groove of when I could write. And because I was doing it kind of one by one, I was able to just do it break it up into pieces and kind of get it done. And yeah, that's how it came to be. And then I really want to get it out quickly because, these startup stories are kind of in the moment, and I don't want it to let it linger. So I decided to basically hire a hybrid publisher, basically a company that would publish the book on kind of a contract basis. So I didn't have to go through the process of hiring, an agent who would then go out and talk to all the publishers. Like, I think I could have gotten it published through a traditional publisher, but it would have taken so much longer that I was more interested in just kind of getting it out there. And hopefully people could read it while some of the stories are still reasonably fresh.
Right. And so the book is definitely on the Venture Pill reading list. Sam and I got to get to it. But while looking at the executive summary, I saw an emphasis on the double bottom line. Could you quickly elaborate more on that concept and how more VCs could participate in serving that double bottom line?
Yeah, absolutely. So, that's basically returns and impact. And, my thesis is this is not about charity. Like, charity absolutely has a role, and there are plenty of books and other things to be said about that. This is about for-profit venture and scalable venture. VCs like businesses that scale. And so all of these ideas have to be ones that initially will work on a small scale and then can be brought to bigger communities, either geographic communities or different markets or whatever. And it's really important that they're both profit-seeking as well as mission-driven, so that second bottom line of purpose, solving a societal problem. So there are lots of problems in the world, and everybody has a different view on what's the most important problem. So I didn't really cover climate tech too much because I felt like there was better coverage of that than I could provide. So I really honed in on this inequality issue as being kind of one of the biggest societal challenges that's very broad and goes across different, societies and covers all kinds of different sectors and so forth. So that's what I decided to focus on. But everyone has their own thing of what's important. And, I've often been asked the question, how do you marry the two of, aren't you compromising one with the other? Like, if I invest in social impact, does that mean that I'm going to compromise my returns? But there really isn't any good evidence of that. I mean, the data that has been collected, I've really tried to decipher all of it. And it's so completely inconclusive because it's hard to define what an impact investment is, for one, and also what the returns of investors are, because some investors say that, hey, I'm not going to invest in fossil fuels or tobacco or whatever, it's really hard just to even find numbers. And, as the saying goes, lies, damn lies, and statistics, you can, put together any numbers you want to make whatever case you want for or against. So I'm not convinced that there's a clear argument that financial returns are greater or worse if it's an impact investment. I mean, if you believe that there is an inverse correlation, then go ahead and just invest in tobacco and guns and, I don't know, whatever other vices you might think about. But I would challenge any investor to kind of say to themselves, is there anything in the world that might be more important to me than maximizing my financial return, particularly for an accredited investor who might be an angel or a VC investor who may not be living paycheck to paycheck and have some money to put to work? Like, might you consider your kids' education to be pretty important? Might you consider investing in longevity and your own health to be more important so you can live a longer life? Like, I truly believe if people stop and think about it, there are things that are more important. And I hate to throw any industry under the bus, but the next NFT that comes along is not really going to move the needle for anybody. Like, it might be satisfying some need that's out there, but it's not really solving a big problem, in my opinion. And people are welcome to shoot darts at me if you disagree with that. But some problems are just bigger than others. And I just hope that investors, as they think about their portfolios, to say, hey, is there something that I care about enough that I really want to focus on, be it education, be it healthcare, be it, democratizing access to credit for the 50% of, say, the African continent that's unbanked? Isn't there some injustice in that might be worth thinking about, whether there's a solution that could be worth investing in? So, yeah, I'm not really trying to preach to anybody. I'm just trying to hopefully open some eyes that, maybe it's worth considering the double bottom line when you think about what what companies you're going to invest in and how you're going to direct the assets that you're privileged enough to have.
Yeah, thanks so much for elaborating on that, Ron. I think that, as Brandon said, resonates with us heavily. And we always find the companies making the biggest impact are the most interesting too. So that's awesome. A big theme, I think, of recent in the venture world certainly is impact investing. What's your take more broadly on the current state of the VC market today? We're curious.
Yeah, been a really interesting time in VC, starting close to 2 years ago when the market started having a kind of a post-COVID downturn. Capital started drying up. It's a lot of it is still a little bit of a mystery, or a mystery inside of an enigma, instead of a riddle, or whatever it was that Churchill said, because there's a big dichotomy in the market right now. Anyone can see that the public stock market is at all-time highs, which should mean that more venture-backed companies should be going public, which should mean that there's more liquidity coming back to the market, which should fund earlier stage startups. But that hasn't really been happening in the last year. Now, we are starting to see some early indicators that 2024 could look a bit different. I've talked to some law firms that work on M&A and IPOs, and they're starting to see some, meaningful movement in their conversations. And just with the markets, really being at highs, and it seems like we've had a soft landing thanks to kind of Fed policy where inflation's come down, but the unemployment is still low, and the market's kind of reflecting that. So there are a lot of very positive macro indicators that venture has been a laggard on this time, which is really interesting because I think that may create a real opportunity. As any value investor knows, you get in when markets are low, not when they're at their highest, generally. It's kind of a broad rule of thumb. And, well, markets have been low. I mean, I think it's a great time to get in. A lot of big investors have been sitting on cash, and there's all this dry powder that should be getting put to work. I think it's starting to. I think it's been slow, but my hope is that we will see a gradual return to some kind of venture normalcy. Now, it might not be the highs of, kind of 2020 or 21, but there's a recovery that I think is going to emerge here, which I think will bring some liquidity back. And so I do envision the markets turning around a bit. Obviously, there's a lot of movement in AI, which I think is going to have a genuine stimulus effect as that, plays into many different industries. There were, AI companies were, 1 in 10 or 20 companies I was looking at a couple of years ago said we were an AI company, whatever. Now it's like everybody is like, well, this is how we're using AI, and that's great. Hopefully for the better. So yeah, I do see that the market is kind of been in a strange state for the last year, but some signs of recovery that I see on the horizon.
Awesome. Well, Ron, before we let you go, this has been a great interview, but just a couple more questions. Curious to hear what advice you might have to offer to any of the venture pilgrims out there, that's what we call our listeners, that are looking to get into the world of venture capital, whether it's entrepreneurship or investing, just not really sure where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of ways to learn about venture, either as an entrepreneur, as a potential future VC. Let me answer that first for those that might be interested in becoming a VC someday. There's no direct path into VC anymore. I mean, there's some more traditional paths, which is you go to Ivy League school or equivalent, and you do investment banking or some consulting, and then get into you can actually get hired and as this kind of associate level. Like that happens, but seeing a lot more of people getting in kind of after having been an operator. So having the experience of being, if you've been a founder, great, or even just working in a startup environment and really getting a feel for that. Great tech skills are really important. I do not have an engineering or tech background, but in many ways, I wish I did. I think it would have helped accelerate my kind of learning curve as you learn about kind of new technologies. But there are many paths into VC. It's not the easiest industry to get into, but there are, it's really about network. So I would say network as much as you can, get to know VCs, and don't reach out to them just saying, I'm looking for a job. Reach out because you want to learn and take the opportunity just to network, learn. That's the way you're going to eventually find your way in, because people and they get to trust you. There's a lot of ways to learn about the industry. Alumni Ventures, as you know well, we have a fellow program that lets people who are in other industries or maybe even still studying start to explore venture, learn about it. There are other traditional ways like your podcast. There are lots of other great podcasts, blogs, books. I mean, just type in venture capital books. There's a ton of them that are great, that are worth learning about and reading. For those who are interested in being an entrepreneur and potentially raising VC, again, start by all these different sources of content just to kind of understand what the baseline is. I think that's, kind of table stakes. You need to know what everyone else knows, first of all, and then use that as a starting point. So kind of reading, your typical books like, Venture Deals or Lean Startup, and, there are a number of others that are kind of come up on your sort of top 10 list on Amazon in VC and entrepreneurship. Kind of start there. But also there are other programs out there besides AV that have sort of more hands-on learning opportunities where you also get to engage with a community of other people that are learning about VC and people who are in VC. There's plenty of online courses as well, even from schools like Harvard and other big names that offer online learning programs. So a lot of ways to learn, but I think the most powerful thing you can do is immerse yourself in startups, go to networking events, meet entrepreneurs, pick their brains. There's a lot of information out there. You just have to kind of gather it and then just start networking away. Because I think getting into either of these businesses, it's really about building a community of people who can support you and teach you something, from their experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's great advice, Ron. Appreciate you sharing that. And of course, we want to give you a chance to share how our listeners could potentially get in touch with you, learn more about Yard Ventures and the other funds you're working on at AV, and of course, your book and your blog. Feel free to plug yourself, whether it's social media or any websites.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So for Alumni Ventures, you can start at av.vc, one of the easiest websites to remember. Alumni Ventures is a little bit of an unusual venture capital organization because we work with individual accredited investors as well as other people who come into our community as experts or just people who want to follow along and learn. I mean, just get on our mailing list. That's one way to learn because we send great newsletters that have interesting information about startups and companies we're investing in and trends in the industry. And we do a lot of webinars. We publish blogs. We do TikToks. We're actually a content generating machine for anyone who's interested in venture and startups. So that's a great place to start. I'm specifically involved with the Seed Fund as well as our Doctors Innovate Fund, which you can find more information about on our website, as well as all the other funds that we operate under the same umbrella. To follow me more specifically, of course, I have my book, Higher Purpose Venture Capital. My book website is higherpurposevc.com. So you can find out a little bit more about me and the book there, as well as links to buy it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and some other places. It's both in soft cover as well as there's a Kindle version. And then lastly, to continue following me and all of my random thoughts, I have my blog, the Higher Purpose SmörgåsBlog, which you can find at ronlevin.substack.com. In addition to profiling venture-backed companies that are solving societal problems, I cover some of my own musings about everything from preferences in elite education to my complaints about our tipping culture, and actually, I covered a nonprofit in the last blog. Tomorrow, I'm going to go live with a new blog, which is actually a podcast and interview with a woman I know who started a school because she thought there was a better way of doing education. And she had a vision. And without any prior training in education, she said, I'm going to partner up with somebody and we're actually going to start our own private school to do things a bit differently. And I think it's a really interesting listen, also because it happens to be where I send my kids to preschool at this school. And I've known the founder who started the school for many years. And I think it's a really interesting entrepreneurial story of, hey, here's a problem in a big area, education, and I'm going to go about solving it and just going to roll up my sleeves and do it. So there's a lot more coming with the blog. I'm going to cover a lot of different topics, but anyone who's interested may kind of subscribe and follow along. And I don't bombard you. It's just one every 2 weeks. But I think there's a lot, hopefully, of interesting content that will come through there. So I appreciate the opportunity to share that. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well, if you'd like.
Yeah, no, that upcoming podcast sounds awesome. Appreciate you giving us a sneak peek. Love the name SmörgåsBlog. Name value alone is must see. But that just about wraps us up for today. So thank you very much, Ron. Appreciate you taking the time to come on for an episode. This was awesome. I'm sure our listeners are going to love it. And yeah, looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate you having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Ron.
Thanks for listening. Join us next week for another dose of startups and venture capital. And as always, we appreciate our pilgrims spreading the word about the show. Share with your friends and help someone else make the pilgrimage. See you next time.
She told me that she only bumps my music when she's lonely. Thinks my vibe's a little low-key, okie dokie, that's alright, but wait, I don't know how to do things different.